It's the Farmer to Farmer podcast, episode 20, and this is your host, Chris Blanchard. My guest today is Pete Johnson of Pete's Greens up in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. Pete farms 90 acres of vegetables. He's got 3 under cover and an additional 130 acres in hay and cover crops. Sells his crops through a CSA and farm stores as well as through wholesale markets. In this episode, Pete shares his strategies for extending the season with roots as well as green storage, in addition to winter growing. We also get into Pete's efforts to develop some new weed control strategies on his large-scale farm to help mitigate risk with the changing climate. In other words, how to control weeds without constantly having to cultivate. Also, we talk about managing employees and projects and scaling equipment for your operation. This was a fun interview with one of my favorite farmers. I hope you enjoy it. Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you by Osborne Seed Company, founded by seed professionals and dedicated to serving professional growers of all scales. Osborne Seed provides quality seeds, excellent customer service, and a fantastic selection. OsborneSeed.com. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you by Fertrell, a friend of nature since 1946. No matter your level of experience, Fertrell has the products and knowledge to help you grow healthy, natural plants and animals. Fertrell.com. Welcome to the Farmer to Farmer podcast, Pete.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
It's thanks for making the time here we're recording this on a Monday morning in early June. That can't exactly be the most convenient time for a farmer in northern Vermont to be taking an hour and a half to do an interview.
Well, it's a lot better than April or May. April and May we're straight out, and by the time we get to June, most of the big crops are in, and plus it's raining this morning, so it's good timing.
You said you guys just came out of a long stretch of really dry weather, and now you've been getting kind of hit with some pretty serious rainstorms.
Yeah, it seems to be the new reality. We have extended periods of one way or the other, and I would prefer the dry. We're kind of in the hills here. It's cooler than lots of places, and we always seem to get enough water somehow. We have enough. We have high organic matter in our soils, but when we get too much rain, it's tough. We have various fields that suffer in various ways.
So, Pete, tell us a little bit about Pete's Greens. Give us the lay of the land up there in the Northeast Kingdom.
Well, we're in Craftsbury, Vermont. We used to call ourselves solidly Zone 3. I don't know if we're quite that anymore, but 3.5 to 4 most years, I guess. We're at 800 feet in elevation on our home farm. We grow in lots of rented land around the area up to about 1,500 feet elevation or so. We have sandy loam, river bottom soils here at home, and then varying degrees of heavier, stonier land as you go up in the hills. We're currently cropping about 90 acres in vegetables, and we have 3 acres under cover, various types of tunnels and greenhouses. And we have another 130 acres in hay or cover crop, preparing for vegetables. We've been working hard on a big rotation the last 2-3 years. We have a year-round CSA with 450 to 650 members, depending on the time of the year. We have 2 retail stores, and we go to 1 farmer's market, and then we sell to a whole bunch of stores and restaurants all over Vermont, and also now some in New York and Boston. We got a crew of, we're probably going to peak at about 30 this summer. About 5 or 6 of us are sort of year-round managerial. Some of us are, there are definitely folks here that are lifers that are not me. There's, 4 or 5 of us that plan to be here forever. And then we have probably 6 or 8 or 10 other local folks, and we have a mostly Mexican, but some Puerto Rican crews that come in seasonally, and a couple families from Mexico we've been working with for a number of years. They come on the H-2A visa program, and we would really struggle to do what we do without these guys. They're awesome, and they really keep us clicking along. We have probably the core of our business now is storage crops. We grow all the crops you can store and store them we have a pretty good sized storage facility and sell them year round. And that's really a much bigger part of our year round business now than winter greens.
So these are things like the carrots and the beets and potatoes.
Carrots, beets, potatoes. We're doing a lot with even greenery in the fall, storing it as long as we can. We found kale and chard, things like that we can store for 2 or 3 months if it goes in the cooler healthy enough.
Really? Tell me how that works. I mean, are you bunching it and putting it in the cooler?
No, typically we do it loose in various ways. Like kale, we'll take the whole plant. Chard, we'll cut a whole plant and lay it in. We're still learning a lot about it. It's kind of some years it works great, other years it doesn't work that well. And we find that coming out of our tunnels, it works better than out of the field. I think there's lower bacteria count maybe on the tunnel stuff.
I would imagine that foliar disease or that foliar microbiome, it probably makes a huge difference.
Yeah, they got to be really healthy and really clean and then really well hardened off. It only works with crops that have, you know how chard gets a little bit, I don't want to say leathery, but on the tougher side as it goes through the cold periods of the fall. It needs to be in that stage. And then the cooling has to be, how it's held in the cooler has to be just right. Like we've put it in bins that were too big and it didn't hold well. Some things like to be iced, some things don't. We're learning about that. It's really a topic that could use some real research because it's very promising. But there's lots of variables, just like with many things that we do.
Well, when you talk about getting 2 or 3 months of additional storage on those greens, I mean, that's really a whole new enterprise, really, compared to the roots. I mean, it's one thing to be selling kale and Swiss chard, another thing to be trying to get people to eat more celeriac.
Right, and we find that having enough I'd say the greenery lubricates the sales of the root crops. Like we have to have enough greenery of some sort. Like I don't think we really make any money growing our winter greens in the greenhouse. Maybe a little, but it doesn't seem like it's a particularly profitable enterprise. But if it helps you sell your hundreds of thousands of pounds of stored root crops, then it's totally worth it.
Yeah, we really found that with the CSA, that when we can put in an 8-ounce bag of spinach in January, that it really increased the perceived value of the rutabagas.
Yeah, it's that way with the CSA. And it's also that way with wholesale customers. We have stores and restaurants that won't bother to deal with us just because they have lots of people they buy from if all we have is storage crops. I mean, we have plenty that deal with us even with storage crops, but if we have greens available as well, we're more of a one-stop local food shopping enterprise, and they'll buy a bunch of storage crops from us too. So our wholesale sales manager is always pushing to have greenery available to him so he can sell the roots.
With a farm your size, you just mentioned that you had a wholesale sales manager. I mean, you must have people who are, I mean, that's their primary job on your farm, selling the CSA shares or selling wholesale. That's a really interesting dynamic compared to being, at my scale where, even with 20 acres of vegetables, where it was a Chris does it all kind of a thing.
Yeah, things are pretty parceled out, and that's been this business is 17 years old now, and it started as tiny as you can start on a quarter acre on my parents' land, and so I've experienced every scale along the way, and I've really enjoyed. I like change in my life, so I've really enjoyed the process of seeing things change and grow. And sort of recognizing the benefits and the drawbacks of each scale. And every scale has significant benefits and significant drawbacks. And there certainly are disadvantages to the scale we're at now compared to half this size or a quarter this size. And there's also things about it that are really nice. And, well, one of them is that, I don't tend to focus on things that I'm not that good at anymore, or things that I was really sort of letting us down on. And we have people who can really excel in different departments and take care of things. And that's nice for me to be able to focus on things that I am really good at and particularly interested in. And those things tend to change over time too. Like there's something I might focus on a lot for a year or two and then sort of get it set up and going. And I tend to be the enterprise developer. So I'll get something going and then it'll pass on to somebody else and I'll be on to the next project. So it's been but having the right people in place to take care of all those things is certainly critical to success.
That's really kind of it resonates with me. Have you read that book, The E-Myth by Michael Gerber?
No.
Yeah, he talks about that as this idea that the entrepreneur's job is to go and innovate and develop the systems, to develop the systems and then to hand them off to somebody else. You figure out the way to do it and then let somebody else have it and go on to do some, innovate in another area. So
yeah, I find it's pretty hard to find people who actually want to develop something new from scratch. If they do, they typically want to do it for themselves. So,
right.
We're now at the point where we have a team that really helps with new projects a lot, but I would say that significantly I'm still the instigator and the one that really formulates them. You know what I'm looking for now? And I just put the word, we have a listserv in Vermont. Are you aware of that? Our Veg and Berry.
Is that through NOPA?
No, we have a Vermont Vegetable and Berry Association, which is a really great group. We have a listserv and an extremely powerful tool. You have to join the organization in order to be in the listserv, so it's caused our membership to just skyrocket because nobody wants to miss out on anything.
Right.
So the other day I just posted that when I travel around the world and go to places where they really have vegetables and they can have crop consultants and scouts show up on a moment's notice or on a regular schedule. I'm really jealous of that, and we could really use that. And I said, "Is anybody doing that around here yet?" And nobody really is. And I got definitely other farmers that are interested as well. But that's the kind of thing somebody at our scale we're really ready for. And we'd have to go 2.5 hours away in Quebec. I'm actually looking into it now, getting somebody to come regularly from up there because we just don't
take a walk through the fields.
Yeah, we're just not keeping up, and we're not. There's new organic tools every year, and I don't make it to all the conferences anymore, and I just don't keep up. And I don't really have like a real hotshot grower working for me. So it's that I could spend a lot of money per hour for somebody who was really good at coming in with good information that was easy for us to grab onto and use. It'd be worth a ton. As you're out and about, if you encounter any development like that in our sort of world, because the folks in Quebec, they're going to be coming from a very sort of mini California type world up there.
Right.
Which is cool. There's a ton to learn from that, but it's also pretty different as far as, we're generalists. We do a moderately good job on lots of different things, and up there they're doing a incredibly good job on the few things they grow.
More focused.
Yeah. So there's a lot to learn from that, but there's also points where you just can't afford to get that into one thing. So it seems like it's time for somebody to start offering this sort of 40 crop model that we're all locked into, like some sort of regular scouting or consulting or something where somebody could buy in for 2 hours a week or 3 hours a month, or just something to sort of get you going and get you moving to the next level.
Putting another set of eyes on what's going on in your growing world.
Yeah, and then if that person is traveling around to 30 different farms, that gets a little dicey, and you can't really say, "Hey, I saw this at so-and-so's place," but what they see is going to be informing them. And we have that in Vern Grubinger, but he's one guy for, I don't know how many growers there are in Vermont now, but there's a ton of them. So
I had 100 people at the workshops that I did there. So you've got it. Yeah, like you say, it's a ton.
So Vern is just like this. He's just like this rat on a wheel trying to keep up. He's amazing, but I try not to bother him because he's way too busy. We need like 5 or 6 more people like that who are out and about, and it's I think it's time for some of us to be paying for the service. We don't have to get it for free.
Well, and I think that's that's the trick. And I think where there would be potential for something like what you're talking about is that by the time you say have somebody pay, that whoever's out there giving the advice or whoever's getting the advice is actually going to use it. It's going to be actionable. They're going to do something with it.
But there's such a cult of not poverty exactly, but not paying for certain things in this world, parts of this world, that it's kind of a cultural. Just like we all start all of our own seeds, which in Europe nobody starts any of their own seeds.
And the same's true in California.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you wanted to start a greenhouse growing starts for people in Vermont, which I think is probably only a few years from actually really happening, it would be a hard slog at first because everybody is used to going to the seed catalog and buying their own seeds and starting their own seeds in their little greenhouse. And, it's just like what everybody does. It doesn't mean it makes sense, but that's just what we all do. And we're not used to paying for somebody to come to our farm and help us farm better, even though it could be 1% of your budget and help you make a 10 or 20% improvement,
Well, it's like buying that one piece of equipment, I just helped a farmer out here, we picked up a mechanical salad harvester.
Yeah.
And it's like, he's cutting his labor bill for just the bill alone on doing greens harvest to a sixth of what it was by hand.
What brand? Ortomac or something else?
It's an Ortomac. Yeah.
Or did you find it used?
No, we just bought it from Sutton Ag.
Yeah, good.
And it's the smallest one they make.
Yeah.
It's not the little hand pushed one,
right,
but the smallest tractor mounted one.
Yeah, I had one of those for 10 years and it was the cat's meow.
Why'd you get rid of it?
We went to a wider bed just for fewer tractor passes on the whole farm. We went to the California 80-inch centers, but I actually missed. So now I have a wide one, but I missed the narrow one, and it was awesome.
Yeah, the thing's just. It was amazing to see it work, and it was one of those things I looked at and went, I would never have put that, even as somebody who felt okay about spending money most of the time on my farm, I would have never put that into my farming operation, and I looked at it and I was like, wow, everybody, if you're growing salad greens, this is why we're competing with $2 a pound salad greens coming out of California.
I used mine for 10 years and sold it for more than I paid for it. Of course,
really?
There was inflation along the way, but yeah, it's like, I think I paid 15 for mine and sold it for 17. And the guy who got it was tickled. They don't wear out. There's nothing wrong with it. It's like sits under cover the whole time. I use it twice a week for 2 hours and wash it off every time. And it'll be fine in 40 years. There's nothing going to go wrong with the thing.
Yeah, there just aren't even that many moving parts to it, really. No,
and we picked up a couple wide ones out in California and that had been, through the ringer out there for 15 years and, replace a bearing occasionally. There's nothing to it. And they don't look as pretty. They've been out in the weather and stuff, but they're a nice piece of Italian engineering and built just to the right level of ruggedness. And really, I visited the factory in Italy and it's totally cool. Because they make like self-propelled ones and every sort of version you can imagine. And they have, it seems like they build them to order. So they had like 10 different things just being finished up in the factory. The factory is like, 10,000 square feet or something like that. It's not very big. And you can jump on and drive any of them that you want that they're finishing up. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, it's really cool. And it's a family thing, and it like one of the brothers showed us around. It was a Saturday and he's like, yeah, drive this one. And you could just feel the innovation. And then they took us, this was the coolest thing. They took us to this farm. They make a bunch harvester as well.
Right. I've seen that videos of that.
Yeah. So it's kind of the same thing with this extra jig on it. And I was toying with buying one and blah, blah, blah. And took us to this Italian parsley farm and they wouldn't let us film it because the farmer was paranoid. I don't know what he thought the big secret was, but there were these two women out there harvesting Italian parsley, and it was unbelievable. It was like a 2-acre field. This was not big, but these two women were bringing in just like a pallet stacked 5 feet tall every 15 minutes of this beautiful parsley, and they were cutting this stuff like 10 times in the course of the growing season. And then it was going into this, it wasn't actually bunching it on that machine, it was just cutting it, and then it was being bunched in this other machine that was sort of half manual. And this one girl was unbelievable at backing this tractor down the beds with his, I had a forklift on the back of the tractor and a 3-point hitch. So they'd fill up a pallet and they'd drop it off, and she would run to this tractor and back it at like 14 miles an hour down the beds. I mean, it was a really impressive piece of driving. Grab it, and it was just like everything was just perfect. And I just stand there watching this, and, it's a crop suited to the country, the climate. It works well. It was beautiful. These women were having a ball bringing in this huge amount of it, and it was just, I don't know. And then the machine was made 10 miles up the road, and it was impressive.
You get a little bit of machinery lust after that?
Yeah, I realized that. I mean, we have so much trouble. We were looking at doing bunch spinach for Whole Foods and stuff, but we just have so much trouble with foliage diseases. It doesn't seem worth it.
So I'm curious, was that farm that you were looking at, was that an organic farm, or were they conventional?
I think they were conventional. That wasn't really, yeah. It was kind of cool too. The owner was a custom operator. This is south of Venice. Really interesting little vegetable region. There's all the fields are 2 to, I'd say, 1/2 to 3 acres in size. But there's enough farms around there that he had like 10 tractors and all kinds of nice implements. And he, like around here, you can hire somebody to come chop your silage. He would go and make beds for somebody or whatever. And I'd seen that in California, but never in a place where the fields were sort of the size of our fields or smaller. And so he had super nice equipment for his own place. And then he had 2 or 3 guys out running around doing custom work all the time. And it's just so interesting to see how things work in different places where you have enough density to actually do something.
Have you tried any of that equipment sharing? Is that something you've been involved in at all?
No, we don't really have anybody. We don't have anybody, especially since we went to these wider beds. Most everything is sort of specific to that. And nobody around here has beds as wide as we do. And we don't have anybody of any scale at all within 15 miles. So I think like there's people now talking about getting a rock picker and sharing that. There's something like that could work.
Something that's a little less, not so much demand to be super timely with it.
Yeah, and then I was looking today. We're doing a lot of breaking sod for vegetables, and quackgrass is a real problem. There's a Danish machine that tears it up and flings the rhizomes up on top of the soil. So High Mowing Seed is near us, and they're taking on a new farm. So I asked Tom if he wanted to go in and buy it with me, and he's interested, but they're not really ready. And I think with them there could be some potential over time because they're starting to scale up a little bit. But as far as in our neck of the woods, we're by far the biggest operation. We just have a lot of stuff that we need it when we need it.
Right.
It's hard to. But I went to a place. I've become a little bit of friends with this guy in Holland, kind of one of the organic pioneers there, and he went in with 5 other farms. They're all within about 10 miles of each other, and allowed them to get GPS on the tractors. So they spent, I think, like $700,000 on a bunch of tractors and equipment, and he said it worked great. But it's also it's a different philosophy over there. I said, what happens when it's like, April 20th and you all need to get something done at once? He says, we just cooperate. But they're all in a co-op together, and, they're a little bit more European. I think it would take a special group of Americans to really make that work. Because this was like all their equipment. It was all, basically all their tractors were in this group together.
We're all pooled together.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you really had to be fully in communication with all the other partners as far as who was doing what when. It wasn't just like 2 or 3 specialized things. But he said that none of them individually could have gone to GPS and then achieved the sort of precision that they did, and he said it was totally worth it.
So Pete, tell me a little bit more about the 84-inch beds, because
that's a really wide bed.
Yeah, well, it's 80-inch, and that's tire center to tire center. And it's kind of funny. When I started farming, my family had this little John Deere 950 tractor, and I bought a tiller for it. Then I bought maybe the greens harvester was the next thing I bought for it, and it was a very narrow tractor. So I ended up with a 36-inch bed top, and that lasted until 5 years ago. And all of a sudden we were growing, 60 acres or something like that on a 36-inch bed top, because we just started buying this stuff for it. And then all of a sudden we had, a couple $100,000 worth of equipment set up for this. And then I was just like, this is crazy. We could be driving our tractors so much less. So we went to we looked around in the East. I thought, we could go to New York State or somewhere like that and find a density of used equipment where we could get stocked up, but just couldn't. There just wasn't enough stuff. So we went to Salinas and filled 3 trailer loads with basically California cast-offs. It was tractors and implements and greens harvesters and all kinds of stuff, toolbars, and a couple big purchases, and then some Craigslist stuff out there too, and filled these 3 trailers, Isaac and I, my buddy, in a week, and shipped it all home, and basically set us up for a whole different world. And we've really enjoyed the efficiency that's come from it. It's not without, it can be a little bit of a hassle at times. Like there's times we wish we could do something a little bit narrower, but we've been really strict about keeping everything except for potatoes on that 80-inch centers, and all of our cultivations done on the 80-inch. Some people back here in the East, they have 80 or 84-inch centers, but they cultivate it on a half width.
Right.
So they use Kubotas to cultivate like a 40 or 42, and we just found that to be the kind of inefficiency we're trying to get away from. So we've sold all our Kubotas, and we have basically one cultivating tractor that we bought out there that's a Ford that straddles the whole thing, and we just switch around tools on it. And I think that the quantity of work we get done with, relatively few highly skilled tractor people has really paid off. And I think we're probably 2 or 3 years away from trying to figure out how to get to GPS so that we can do things really arrow straight. We spent a lot of time working on driving straight because it really influences everything else. But we're, farming hillsides and all kinds of crazy stuff. And there's times when our cultivator, who is my brother, Andrew, is not as pleased as he could be, and he is the key. He does all of our cultivation on all of our crops, and having him be happy is extremely important. So,
and I assume his happiness is probably tied to how good of a job it's possible to do.
Exactly. So if we do a really good job setting up the beds and planting whatever we're planting, and with weed control ahead of time, and he can cruise through and do his best job, he's psyched. And if he's like trying to pick up our pieces, once you screw up some part of that, the rest of it's very difficult. We're also trying to, reduce the time he spends. Any kind of weeding, be it mechanical or especially by hand, is really not a productive use of resources. So part of our big rotation we're working on now is just reducing all sorts of weeding. So we're spending more time doing things that are more focused on building soil fertility or harvesting or whatever it may be that actually makes money or is building for the future rather than just maintaining.
And you talked earlier about how you're widening out your rotation or trying to lengthen it. And are you going to one of these programs where you've got ground that's just dedicated to cover crops for a year or two at a time, and then rotating into crops and then back out into cover crops again?
Yeah, we're basically going into some sort of hay crop for 2 years, like a high legume hay mix. And we have a pig operation. We're feeding pigs with it, but we have way too much hay for the pigs now. So we're probably going to be getting beef cows, and it's seeming like this is new. We're just buying equipment for it and getting set up now, but we're going to start doing a lot of growing straw and or other kinds of green material, possibly these same high legume hays, and chopping them and spreading them as mulch over vegetables. We're building a rig where we'll pass over a vegetable bed and basically cover the vegetable rows, and then the chopped straw will rain down over that. And we're hoping to get set up so we can basically mulch half or more of our total acreage. It doesn't work with all crops, doesn't work with salad greens, for example, but most of the rest of it works fine. And we think it's going to really help, obviously with moisture retention. It'll help build fertility. And we have a lot of splashing that leads to foliar diseases in this climate. We get a lot of hard thunderstorms, and I'm hoping it's going to really have a significant effect on that. Not to mention, we're farming some land that is steeper than we'd prefer to be on, but it's what's available around here. And so getting a mulch on that will be really positive from a erosion standpoint as well. So it's early stages, but we're equipped now with both land and equipment to actually make really large quantities of this mulch material. And I'm really excited. I think it's the big next step for us. And we haven't really seen how to crack this whole no-till organic thing that some folks have been working on in our climate, with the kind of land that we have. It hasn't seemed, and the kind of crops that we're growing, especially with a focus on early crops, it hasn't seemed that plausible for most of what we grow. But getting a mulch on fairly early in the cropping season with a bunch of crops, it does seem quite plausible. So I'm hoping that in 2 years we really have a system pretty well figured out that we're covering most of our, at least half or more of our ground pretty early on in the vegetable cycle.
That's really cool. You always think of mulching as being a smaller scale thing. And you're talking about half of your ground. You're looking at 45 acres in mulch.
Yeah, and it turns out we got haying equipment last year. It turns out we really like haying, so it's sort of going along well with that. And I tell my brother the goal is that he spends more time haying, less time cultivating, because haying, you're kind of bombing around gathering up this resource, and cultivating, you're doing this tedious work trying to kill weeds and not kill your crop. And obviously we'll always be cultivating on some level, but and we've also always struggled with this idea of, you cultivate, you keep your crop really clean early on, and then a lot of crops take a long time to mature and become difficult to cultivate at some point. And even in super clean ground that we've done a great job on, where we have weeds eventually go to seed, is in these long-term crops where we just can't really get in there for the last 2 months, for example. And so mulching entirely solves that, along with a host of other things. So the math I've been doing sort of on the napkin is that we could invest a significant amount in this and it would really pay off. It's going to be really interesting to see if the potential disease, helping with the foliar diseases actually pans out as I'm hoping it might, because that would be a huge extra, factor in the whole thing.
Well, yeah, those are such a challenge. I mean, it's like the Italian bunch harvester that you were talking about earlier with the parsley. If whether you're doing it by hand or doing it mechanically, getting that level of efficiency is really dependent on not having those foliar diseases be present, not having to do the quality control.
Totally. Yeah. If you can grow clean stuff, it doesn't really matter so much how you deal with it, and you're going to do okay. But if you're having problems, and these climates we grow in are ridiculously variable. As I was telling you earlier, we had virtually no rain here for 6 weeks since the snow melted, and now it has rained here virtually. It's rained 8 out of the last 11 days, and a couple of those days we've gotten 2 to 3 inches in a day twice, and right now it's misting, and it's just like, my crops went from looking dry but beautiful to now somewhat waterlogged, and the problems are already starting. And yet, next year could be the complete opposite. And so just figuring out a system that, it maybe isn't perfect for everything all the time, but it covers as many bases as you can, just seems so important in a climate like this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think anything you can do. I mean, the reason they grow it in California is because it's a heck of a lot easier than it is to do it in northern Vermont. And anything you can do to cut down on that variability, because that's the big thing you have when you're farming in a desert is complete control.
Right. I remember I visited Yuma, Arizona, which is where they grow the greens in the winter, about 12 years ago, and got to ride around with a farmer for the day, and he said, yeah, once a winter it rains and it screws up everything. I said, how much does it rain? It's like a half inch. He said, it messes up our whole schedule. We can't get anything done for a week. It just throws everything into, I'm just like, wow. Because his whole world is, they got the irrigation. When you irrigate constantly, it's just part of life and you don't think about it. And it allows you to schedule things just as you want. And, it was just an amazing thing to hear.
Well, you really do have the ability to do everything on a calendar.
Yeah.
I mean, we're, and again, if you cut down that variability, even things like how long is it going to take us to harvest 1,000 heads of lettuce, just, if you've got butt rot, it takes a lot longer than it does if you've got nice, clean fields. And even that kind of variability makes stuff difficult to plan. How many people are we going to need to have? How long is it going to take? What are we going to be able to get done afterwards? You just don't really know for certain. And, when you cut that out, suddenly it becomes, it takes this long to harvest 1,000 heads of lettuce.
Yeah.
Much less the idea that you can plant when you want, cultivate when you want, weed,
Yeah, it's interesting. In California, they tend to not have actually mechanized as many things as you'd think. Like a lot of the harvesting is still very much hand labor based. And my impression is just that unlike Europe, where I think the cost of labor is just high enough where they've really had to work on machines for a lot of these things, in California, it just works with using the relatively inexpensive Hispanic labor, and the climate's really consistent, and it just pencils out. And there hasn't been a lot of incentive to invest in technology, and it's kind of neat in some ways. It probably won't last forever. I'm guessing that they're gonna have to head more and more in a technical realm. But I mean, you go to Holland and you see quite a bit more mechanization of harvesting and whatnot than you do in the fields of Central California.
It sounds like you've spent quite a bit of time out exploring other farming systems in other parts of the world. Yeah,
I have, and I've gained a lot from it. California, Europe, Quebec for sure. I mean, just north of us here in Quebec, we call it mini California. There's 6,000 or 7,000 acres that's it's pretty much same systems. There's a big baby greens farm there. It's really interesting to spend time there. Those are probably the main ones. I'd like to get to Africa and Asia and places further afield. But Holland, I found, if you ever want to go a place where you just see how things are just done spot on perfectly, and I found it to be the people to be really open, and even like you go to equipment dealers and places like that, you can really gain a lot. In a tiny country where there aren't that many people and you can get around it pretty quickly, I've really learned a lot over there, and they really specialize in potatoes, carrots, and onions there, which are things that we grow a lot of. So it's I try to get there every 2 or 3 years and wander around and see what's going on.
That's really cool. Do you go to the same farms every time, or do you just like show up on farmers' doors and knock and like, hey, I'm here from America, show me your farm?
Yeah, we do a little bit of that. We generally go as part of BEJO. BEJO is a seed company that I've gotten to go with Tom Stearns from High Among Seeds a couple times. So he's in a partnership with the seed company BEJO. And so they have some field days over there, which are spectacular. And then they lead trips out and about. And then they've gotten to the point where we can say what we want to see, and they'll set up special field trips for us. And then I've been a couple of times on my own doing things separately. And people are really receptive. It's interesting over there. It's this country that exports, I think they're the world's largest grower of onions and, the highest yields of potatoes, and they're really good at growing this stuff. And this whole direct marketing and things like farmers markets and CSAs are really not well developed in Holland at all compared to Germany. So a lot of the larger organic growers sell a lot of their food in Germany, which is, right next door. But they always kind of lament that the Dutch population is really not coming along that fast. So I think it's changing some now, but it's just interesting to be in a place where things are so well done and so well figured out, and yet the local population is not really interested in the same way that, say, the population of Vermont is in local food. That's sort of the same in Quebec too. Quebec is coming along more now. There's a lot more small farms and whatnot, but they have a real industry there. They grow, like if you go in the grocery store and buy potatoes, onions, or carrots, basically year round, they're from Quebec, and a whole bunch of other stuff too. So I think it's a little bit less remarkable that your neighbor can sell you potatoes in January than in Vermont. When you go in the grocery store in January and buy potatoes, the chain grocery stores mostly have potatoes from places like Idaho. And so it's more remarkable when a local farm has local potatoes in January. So it's kind of it's interesting to me that the places where they're actually quite a bit better at this stuff than we are, they don't have the same access to direct marketing, or they don't yet, at least.
It does, yeah, just because it doesn't have that same special feel.
Yeah,
to
I'm
it.
not sure that's exactly the reason why, or what exactly is all involved. But I know the Quebec growers, when they come down here, they're like, wow. In Vermont, I think much like parts of Wisconsin and parts of, the upper Northwest, the consumer public is really keen on what's going on. And we're just kind of used to that, and we don't take it for granted. We appreciate what it is, but it's part of our culture, and it's certainly not the case everywhere.
It's really interesting. Now, you've put a lot of time and energy with Pete's Greens into developing your local food community and your local food economy there in Vermont.
Yeah, we've been our CSA has bought in food from other producers for many years, and we've really tried to support other growers and people producing all sorts of local food to really develop new things. So we like to be guinea pigs, where they can send things to our CSA or our stores and see how it works. And we've seen an amazing transformation in this state in the last 10 years. I can't even keep up anymore. I can't keep up with who's doing what, where, what they're making now. And it's just like this runaway train. And you go back 15 years and you could really go around the state and say, okay, this person's doing this person's doing that. It was really obvious what was going on. There just wasn't that much of it. I mean, there was a lot of it compared to maybe other places, but now it's just like things feeding on each other. And it's been a really fun thing for me to be part of personally, and fun for our business to be part of. And it's kind of hard to imagine where it's going to be in 10 years because there's so much energy and life involved in it. And there's some growing pains. There's been some contractions here and there. Some people complain that the Vermont market is a bit tapped out, perhaps. Of course, like everywhere, it's hard to acquire land or access to land, and that limits some things. But we also have some pretty new developments of getting Vermont food to places like Boston, New York in significant ways, which wasn't the case 3 or 4 years ago. So I think the potential is wide open, and there's just like a steady stream of new entrepreneurs springing up and doing cool things.
Why do you think that Vermont in particular has fostered that sort of an environment? I mean, I know when I go around to, and I get all over the country, and people in various places are like, "Wow, you guys have it so good up there in Minnesota and the Twin Cities." And I think Vermont is very much like that kind of an environment where local food it's an expectation, not just something that occasionally shows up and seems neat. And it's really happening at scale. People. The grocery stores there are heavily invested in it. It's not just bringing in a few things out of somebody's garden. And what do you think contributed to that in Vermont, that it's taken off in the way that it has in the last 15 years?
Well, we had something that was maybe a bit unique in Vermont. We had a real back to the land movement in the 60s and 70s where mostly young city people came here and mostly got into sort of like farming or some sort of agricultural type things, and mostly didn't continue to do those things over time, but mostly stayed here and became professionals or whatever they became and raised their kids here. But it sort of like seeded the area with a group of people who had a certain idea about what they wanted from their life. And then we've continued to have an influx of people. Like, I didn't grow up here. I moved here when I was 12. People from outside who come here and like what it is. I mean, it's a big town, Vermont, 600,000 people. So, it's easy to have everybody hear your message in the state, or at least a lot of people. So it's relatively cohesive in that way. And we're pretty good at rallying around things that we believe in. And so I think that the combination of sort of scattering these back-to-the-landers all over the hills here, and then, the cool things that they ended up doing, and that had a lot of influence over what was already a super agrarian economy. And we don't really have any big industries here. We don't have a whole lot of big stuff going on. So currently in my neck of the woods, agriculture is the big growth economy. Like, we've added a couple hundred jobs within 15 miles of here in the past 10 years, and nothing else is adding jobs. So now it's got this energy going where, it's people are moving here specifically to work for these businesses, and then they're starting their own business or whatever. So it's this whole new wave, but it happened here, I think, significantly in part because of these folks who moved here 30, 40 years ago and sort of set up a climate that was receptive to it.
I like that climate of receptiveness, I think it really is something. I mean, I do think that, having, I don't want to pin it to politics, but in general, I think having the right social climate, really makes a difference with the places that have gotten out ahead on local foods, even though it's obviously an issue that doesn't, it can certainly cross political lines, but I think it has seemed to be more associated with kind of like what you were saying, that back to the land crowd, the people that are thinking in an alternative fashion, really does help.
Yeah. Most of those folks are coming to a place like this because they're seeking something different. They're coming, they were typically they're typically well-off young people that somehow were not enamored with their parents' life in some way and wanted to do something different. And almost every one of them can tell you a story about, I moved here, I started clearing this land, I got a bunch of goats, I got this and that and the other, and after 6 years I got sick of it and I got a job, but they still have this thing in them, and then they have kids, and their kids are sort of coming from this different background, and it's a powerful thing. And now we're into the third generation of those folks, and it makes for an interesting area. Like it makes for some, and then the nice thing about Vermont is even the people that we call Vermonters, who are people who have been here for generations, are known for being very tolerant and very open and actually interested in the crazy people who move here. So it's a culture in which these different groups of people associate with each other pretty freely. And it leads to some really interesting mixes and cross-pollinations and things like that. And it would be really different if there was this really feeling of us versus them, but there isn't so much here. And I live in a town that has a college, and I mean, it's a town of 1,000 people, has a college, and it has an outdoor center that's got an elite group of cross-country skiers and rowers that live there all the time. And, you know, that's not something that really, like, the average small Vermont town has. And it's really interesting to see how, and both of these institutions have been here for 30, 40, 50 years now, to see how the effect of having all these different people who come here for these two institutions, what that has had on the people who have lived here forever. And they've sort of been more exposed because they've been around these different groups of folks, and the people who come here to, like, be a professional cross-country ski racer are also exposed to the longtime farmers and loggers and people who've lived here forever. And it makes for a nice combination that is maybe something you don't get to throw people together so much in other parts of the world because maybe the places are just too big. I don't know. There's something about it where we actually associate with each other here.
You know, one of the other things that I found really cool about Vermont, I flew out there to do some seminars in March, and it was like, as soon as you land at the airport in Burlington, you know you're in Vermont.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just no question about it. And I've been at a lot of airports. In fact, this last winter, where I had a particularly heavy travel schedule, and I got to the point one time where I was walking through an airport, and I for a few seconds couldn't remember where I was. Yeah. and there was no indication.
Yeah.
You know, but like you land in Vermont and there's rocking chairs in the airport. Yeah. You know, it's like, oh yeah, I know exactly where I am now.
Well, we're proud. It's really hard to find somebody who's not proud of living here. And it's also really hard interestingly enough, it's hard to find somebody who will complain about the winter here. Most people whether they're new or been here a long time, will say, I like the winter. And they seem like they genuinely do. Like people who live here like the winter. And so it's really fun to live in a place where there's this deep-seated, genuine pride for where it is. And it's different. It's special. We all know that it is. And we all appreciate that. And I just feel honored to be allowed to be here. I mean, it's just really, really fun for me.
Pete, we're going to take a pause here and get a word from our sponsors. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you by Fertrell, a friend of nature since 1946. Fertrell has a full-service agronomy department that provides support to their nationwide network of customers, dealers, and distributors. And Fertrell is about far more than just any one type of crop. They work with commodity and forage crops, large-scale vegetable and fruit farms, and small-scale and backyard growers, as well as livestock producers. No matter your level of experience, Fertrell has the products and the knowledge to help you grow healthy, natural plants and animals. Their full line of soil amendments, dry blend and liquid fertilizers, and weed, pest, and disease control products for organic production means that they can help you to assemble a comprehensive system for organic farming. The Fertrell Company knows that healthy soils are the foundation for healthy crops, not just from a philosophical standpoint or for maximizing nutrition, but also because building healthy soils sets the stage for harvest efficiency, post-harvest quality, pest resistance, and succession planting. Fertrell, better naturally. Fertrell.com. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is sponsored by Osborne Seed Company. Osborne Seed Company is focused on serving professional growers on any scale, from market gardens to commercial scale organic and conventional growers. With their active sourcing and trialing program, Osborne Seed is able to offer a wide range of products, giving growers a competitive edge with niche products, as well as a greater selection of varieties to meet the challenging and increasingly variable growing and marketing conditions faced by today's growers. I learned about Osborne Seed from one of the fussiest growers I know who recommended them to me as a source of high-quality seeds. One of the little telling details about Osborne's dedication to quality and their focus on market farmers is that they pack all of their seeds to order in resealable foil packets, which helps to maintain the quality of the seeds over time. When you grow crops for market in successions throughout the season, you need quality seeds the first time you plant them and the last, and little details like this make a huge difference. Osborne Seed Company, high quality seed and superior customer service. New and existing customers get $5 off the first order of $50 or more when you mention the Farmer to Farmer podcast. OsborneSeed.com.
Well, you talk about the winters, and I think this is a nice segue into something I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to talk about in this episode about your greenhouse side of your operation. We talked earlier about your storage crops, but I think the first time I became aware of you, there was an article like back in the 1990s in Lynn Bazinski's Growing for Market magazine, and there was I think you had written it about the artwork that your sister had painted on the side of your truck for Pete's Greens, and it's always kind of interesting to me like how 20 years ago the idea that you had a painted truck was actually a pretty unique and cool idea,
Yeah.
But you went on and to do a lot of work with winter production and with some greenhouse design. I remember being particularly in awe of the half-acre wooden structure that you put up on your farm. Can you tell us a little bit more about the greenhouse side of your operation?
Yeah, I'd say early on it was really a big focus. I had this idea when I first started. I'd gotten to know Elliot Coleman, who's been a really good friend and mentor, and that I was going to grow fall, winter, spring, and take the summer off. And so I got done with college and moved back to my parents. My parents live up in the hills from here. It's really cold where they live. And I put up a couple greenhouses and sort of hacked through the first winter and got to May, and I was like, I'm actually selling food now. This is when I'm supposed to stop.
Right.
And just realized it wasn't in the cards around here. The difference between zone 3 and zone 5.5 is huge in winter production. And so kind of have been going relatively year round ever since then. But it was a really early interest of mine. Even as a kid, I would just sort of play around with plastic structures and stuff like that. And I'd say it's become less of a key part of our business in the last 3 or 4 years. We're sort of reinvesting in it now. We're putting up a gutter connect house and prepping ourselves to really start taking things to a higher level. But we have currently 3 acres under cover. 2 of those acres are a 3-season Arnois tunnel that are not snow-worthy, and the rest are various greenhouse designs, some heated, some not.
So those Arnois tunnels, those are similar to the hay groves, right? Where it's a relatively lightweight multi-bay structure.
From my perspective, I've never had a hay grove, but I know people who have. The Arnois are considerably stronger. They actually have roll-up venting. From my perspective, a somewhat better engineered thing. They're also, all of our greenhouses are Arnois, and we really like the company. They're out of north of Montreal, and family company, do a really nice job.
That's all of ours were too. We love that company.
Oh, you really? I didn't think they were so much out where you were. How'd you discover them?
Well, because I spent a couple years farming out in Maine and got to know them while I was out there.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And then, when we looked around at the other options here, there just weren't very many. And, this was back in 1999. The other thing we ran into was that nobody here would build us a mobile tunnel. And with Arnois, we were able to work with their engineers to design the mobile tunnels that we wanted to build.
Yeah, from what I've seen, for the same money, you get a significantly better structure, and you have access to These folks up in Quebec, they're smart. They're hustlers. They're smart, and they get the job done. We've been pleased over and over doing business up there, and some of their engineering is really clever, and their pricing is really fair. And we don't worry about snow on our annual houses. I mean, that's not to say we never clear them, but there's not any danger of some snow event bringing them down. They are strong.
Yeah.
So that's not the case with the tunnel, but we have had a good bit of snow on it. It's been fine, but it certainly wouldn't come through a winter around here. And we found it to be like any tunnel, it's quite a bit more maintenance than a regular greenhouse. And more and more, we're kind of going away from temporary structures and all the sort of hoop things that people are doing now. We're more and more interested in just having proper greenhouses with peak vents and things that require less maintenance and less attention, that things that just kind of work on their own. So we're adding peak vents to 4 houses this year. We're raising them up so they're better for vining crops. We're putting in this gutter connect and just sort of trying to sort of standardize things. And I don't know about you, we find just the maintaining and operation of manual roll-up sides to be a major management thing on our farm.
Yeah.
And whereas we have 2 peak vents that have been working flawlessly now for 7 years and require no attention and really minimal maintenance and do a beautiful job venting greenhouses. So the fact that I don't have them on every house is just crazy to me when I actually stop and do the math and think about it. So we're reinvesting now and really getting ourselves set up for the next phase. But it's been a key part of our business, and it was from the start to have food out of season. And 12, 15 years ago, there weren't that many people doing it. Now it's almost a de facto part of being a northeastern vegetable farm, and that's great. I think it's been really good for improving the food supply around here. And it certainly has contributed to the knowledge base. There's really so much more information now than there was back then. And it's so much easier for new folks to get started and figure out how to do this stuff and have a viable business in a year or two rather than hacking along for a while.
Well, and I think that year-round potential is so important if you want to take advantage of it, if it fits with your quality of life goals, that you have that ability to not only keep yourself busy and keep cash flowing in all winter, but the ability to keep good people on through the winter time, I think is just enormous.
Yeah, the good people thing has been huge for me. I mean, when we actually really committed, this is probably going back now 8 or 9 years ago, to really being in business year round and really having a staff that was with us all the time. It's not without problems, but we have experienced over the years the potential for burnout is much higher when you basically finish up around here. November 1st is the end of our outdoor season. The ground starts to freeze year in, year out on November 1st, and we're done. And it's always a big push to get done. Like we're getting all these root crops in, getting everything picked, blah, blah, blah. And then the next week, we're like washing and packing and selling stuff. Same as the previous week. And there's definitely, we've gotten better at sort of recognizing how that affects our staff and trying to have enough people around so that we encourage people to go on vacations, especially around then. And we always have significant changeover around then. Even with local folks, we find that people are just like, who are looking for sort of an outdoor vegetable farming experience are now needing to do something else for a while. They may come back later, but it's been there's sort of like a seasonality expectation in this business that you don't have in other businesses. And when you sort of get rid of that and need good, solid folks year round, and I mean, we do 3/4 as much business on our slowest week as we do in our busiest week now. So, we're busy in January. You can't just sort of hack along with whoever's kicking around. You got to have a real crew. And So it's been there were 2 or 3 years where in November we're like, shit, there's nobody around here who wants to work anymore. And we got to look at this differently in some way. So we've just come to expect some changeover. We tend to do a lot of hiring that time of year. And there's a whole new group of people who are looking for work that time of year, we've discovered. So it's probably our biggest point of the year where we bring in new folks who, and some of them tend to rise and end up being real stars for us. So you gotta, if you're going into it for the first time, or if you're really growing that part of your business, realize that not everybody's going to want to, keep plugging away 40, 50, 60 hours a week through the winter. It's hard, and it tends to be wet and damp and cool and not as much fun as picking strawberries maybe in June. And we're sort of getting to the point where it's actually mostly a different group of people who are focused on the indoor work and just tend to like it more. But it's taken years to sort of understand that and get through that transition.
I think especially what you just brought up, that about the end of the season and not having that opportunity to lie on your back and catch your breath in the first week of November.
Yeah.
I remember when we got into the herb packaging business, Thanksgiving was the big week for us. And so we similarly got out of the field at around November 1st. And then it was straight into the Thanksgiving rush after that. And it really changed the pace and the pattern on the farm at that time of year. And really, it took a lot of adjustment for me personally, just to be ready for that. That there wasn't going to be a break. You just kept right on rolling. And of course, Thanksgiving gets done and then it's Christmas. And, then maybe in January there was some downtime for us. But yeah, it took a lot. It took a lot out of us. And I think it was hard on the employees, but also hard on us as a family to not have that space after the intensity.
Yeah, it's interesting how those things ebb and flow. Like for me now, as still the chief grower of this operation, I have to be extremely engaged in April and May. There are so many things you do in April and May that you only do one time a year. And if you screw it up, you've screwed it up. And so I am really on and into early June. And then by July, mid-July especially, the crew, things are dialed in. Things are clicking along. There isn't a whole lot of new stuff going on. We're still planting plenty or whatever, but carrots have already been planted 6 times. So we kind of got it figured out for the year, hopefully. And so I tend to not have to be nearly as on and actually have time to sort of work on projects and stuff in July and August. And then we're so focused on storage crops now that September and October are very big months for us. And then personally, when we get to November and on through the winter, I'm not that involved in all the packing and shipping that we do that time of year. So I have time for projects again. And I think it's sort of the same for a lot of my management staff. We all have to be on board for certain times of the year when things are all hands on deck. And then other times of the year, like my main guy is going to be building this greenhouse all summer because we don't actually need him as part of our cropping thing. Whereas in April and May, he has to be fully engaged mentally and physically to get everything done right. So it's nice to have, the people who are going to be around forever. All of us like having times where we have to be totally involved in the production, also having times where we're working on different projects. So it's nice to have that balance where, at certain times you actually have to do certain things on certain days. And other times it's more open to what makes sense and what you want to focus on.
I think it's something about your scale of operation that I think is easy to overlook as one of the advantages of being the size that you are, that you have that ability to kind of flow in and out of your operation. To have the times when it's your job to get the parsnips planted, but not be the one that has to be making sure that the parsnips get out the door every week in November, January, and February.
Yeah, it's huge. And the counter to that is that the overall responsibility always goes up. There's always as it gets bigger, there's more risk. There's more risk of something terrible happening with an employee, be it a safety thing or whatever. Things happen when you get enough people milling around each other. The risk of, equipment breakdowns are sort of a constant reality of life and how to deal with them. Just making decisions about insurance and things like that become a significant part of life. And I don't tend to enjoy some of those things so much, but I do enjoy what you just pointed out, which is that I don't have to be there washing and packing all the parsnips. And I like the fact that they're being washed and packed. I check in. I notice things about them occasionally, but there are people who are very tuned into that, and they're having their own evolution with this farm or their career, and sort of choosing the path they want to follow. And I'm on my own path, and it's I really struggle to understand folks who sort of park themselves at a certain scale and continue to find joy and pleasure and creativity in that. I'm kind of envious of it, actually, because obviously you could spend the rest of your life learning about parsnips. Like, you really could. You could devote your life to everything about parsnips or whatever it is you're focused on and just do a better and better or more creative or interesting job at that. I'm just not wired that way. I have to actually have significantly different things going on, and which leads to kind of a sprawling thing eventually. But it's all, I can't complain to anybody about it other than myself, and it's just sort of as these businesses are, they're sort of a reflection of people's personalities, and you end up creating what you lead yourself to. And if you have a problem with it, you got to talk to yourself about it and figure out what to do.
That's really good. I like that. So, hey, I know you've also undergone another evolution on the personal front lately.
Yeah.
Tell us about that and how that's going.
Oh, it's great. Just over 2 years ago, I met my wife, Eloise. She's the brother of a longtime neighbor and friend. She's a sister, sorry. That would be a bit odd if my wife was a brother. And we have a 9-month-old baby, and I'm 43, so it was a long time coming, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. And she's from Quebec and learning how to live in a different language and a different culture and with a man and all these things, and it's mostly going really well. And she's a little bit involved in the farm in different places like our farm stand, but the goal is not for her to be fully immersed in the farm at all. She's a wildlife biologist and wants to get back to doing that kind of work. And so I think that's been healthy. I've had a previous relationship where we were both fully immersed in the farm, and that became really hard. So it's hard to predict how this whole balance is going to work as time passes, but so far I really enjoyed what it's brought to all of us.
Congratulations on that.
Yeah, thanks.
That's great.
We have, and some of the key partners in the farm, we have twins about the same age and a 3-year-old. So more and more of us there's kids kicking around now. And, that's leading to things like, some people having to be home at 5 o'clock every day and not really work on the weekends. And it's occasionally challenging but I think it's good overall for both the business and all the personalities involved.
I think it really forces some, if you let it, it's got the opportunity to force you to have some discipline.
Yeah.
And not just let the farm do what the farm's going to do, but to actually start to exert some more control over it.
Well, I mean, so often you go to operations and you can just sense that the owners and possibly a lot of the crew are just sort of endlessly working, just like working too many hours without any sort of specific concept of what's enough or where to cut it off. And I just find that leads to less getting done and not getting done as well. So we actually try to keep our crew hours pretty reasonable, like low 50s is sort of where we like to top things out. 40 is tough. I mean, it's hard to have somebody to be a key part of a farm who works 40 hours a week. But I find that low 50s works well. I mean, several of us, I certainly work more than that, and several of us do. But that seems to be a level where people stay relatively fresh and they yet are involved enough to be really engaged and aware of what's going on. And there's still a lot of time left in the world when you work 50 hours a week. So,
yeah. All right. Well, Pete, so I'd like to pivot here and go to our lightning round with just a few questions that we'd like to ask all of our guests to wrap up the show.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite tool on the farm, Pete? If you had to pick one.
We'd be lost without a tine weeder. We have a couple Lely tine weeders. They're absolutely key to our weed control program. Literally, I have no idea what we would do without them. I've never had an Einbach. I'd like to get one. I'd like to have actually a fleet of tine weeders that do different things for different things. It's sort of been the program, but
so that you could have them adjusted in different ways.
Yeah, and I think there's a place for having, 6 different actions. I mean, there's such an important key tool. For example, 3 weeks ago, we sowed a whole bunch of cover crop, and we sowed it really deep, oats and peas, and we tried to tine weed on top of that, and I thought it was working great, but we actually killed a significant amount of the cover crop, even though I was out there rooting around and thinking that we weren't. So I needed something with a lighter action to do that job right. But on an organic vegetable farm of any scale, it is a super key tool.
I remember a farmer that I worked with about 20 years ago when they brought one onto their farm, and he's like, wow, where has this been all my life?
Yeah, it's amazing. And it allows more efficient preparation of land too, because you can prep a bunch of land and then you're only improving it for the next 2 to 3 weeks as you tine weed it regularly.
By stale bedding it and rooting out those weeds.
You're actually, you're killing weeds. You're working up your seed bed just gets nicer and nicer. It only you can't do it for months. It only lasts so long. But I still have friends that I can't. They say to me, I can't imagine how I come up with enough time to get ahead on my bed making. And I say, I can't imagine making beds just as I'm ready to plant them. We make them in blocks and get ahead, and then we run out there with a tine weeder, which is not only a great tool, it's a super fast tool to use. The faster you dry, the better it works. So it's not a big investment in resources to keep things tine weeded. And I wish I knew how many miles this one we have has traveled this time. It's unbelievable.
Oh, the tines are still intact, huh?
Oh, we replace. We spend a lot of money on tines every year, and they only last so long. But it's boy, has that paid for itself 500 times over.
All right. So next question that we like to ask is, what's the most challenging crop that you continue to grow?
We struggle with garlic, and it's frustrating to me because every home gardener around here grows great garlic. This year we're really paying attention we're doing some leaf tissue testing and trying to figure out what's going on. We've grown it in lots of different fields around here, and the garlic world, as you know, is booming. There's lots of potential to sell garlic, and we always have pretty small garlic. So I think we're getting it figured out, but that's certainly been one. Rhubarb as well. We actually have pretty good demand for rhubarb, and I finally figured out we've just been over picking it and not fertilizing it enough. So we put in a new plantation, and I have high hopes for it. But again, you can stumble upon any garden around here and they have a patch of rhubarb. It's 6 feet tall and just going crazy, and I can't grow rhubarb. So they just are both things that aren't super natural here for some reason, and I'm having to actually really focus on what the crops need. But that's, it's just a lesson on having to do your homework and do it right.
Yeah, even on the stuff that seems like it should be simple.
Yeah, I mean, you think rhubarb, you think you just put them out there and they grow, but we were just picking them hard, and we weren't putting enough fertility on, and they just get tired. The home gardeners don't pick theirs typically.
Right.
Most people don't eat it that much. So.
They make one pie, and that that's what it's a couple stalks, and then they're done.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh. All right. And finally, if you could go back in time and tell your beginning farmer self one thing, what would that be?
Go get a nice field. I started. It was a great learning experience. I started by clearing woods at my parents' land and building up soil, and I guess I wouldn't trade the experience for the world. And yet there were opportunities back then. If my business had grown faster and sort of like, I see some of these new young folks now who just like show up and are able to tap into knowledge resources and financial resources that are available and just get set up and get going. And it's exciting for me to see how that infrastructure has improved so that people can do that. And we're in a bit of a land grab around here right now. We have a strong dairy economy. We have all these new businesses going on around here. And if I'd been in a position to acquire land 5 years earlier, we could have acquired some really nice farmland for very little money. So I think from looking at this as hopefully a multi-generational business, to have gotten going faster by getting some good land, even just go leasing a nice field and getting going, would have put us in a better position. And maybe, probably, I never really worked for anybody else. So just spending a little bit of time working with somebody who really understood mechanical things, we kind of hacked our way to things like cultivation knowledge, and we're really good at it now, but I could have sprung myself ahead pretty fast by going and interning on a couple places for short periods of time even. And there's places where you can do a lot yourself and you get a long way and whatever, but you can also save yourself a lot of wandering around in circles by just going to somebody who's good at something and learning from them.
Great. Well, thanks, Pete. This has been a really interesting interview. I really appreciate you taking the time here. So thank you very much.
I'm going to get on your podcast program and listen regularly.
It's the podcast app on your iPhone. So
sounds good.
It should be easy.
Thanks, Chris. Let me know when you're in Vermont next time.
I'll do that. Take care, Pete.
See you later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. So wrapping things up here, I'll say again that this is episode 20 of the Farmer to Farmer podcast, and that you can find the notes for this show at farmertofarmerpodcast.com by looking on the episodes page or simply searching for Johnson. If you like what you hear, think about signing up for my newsletter, The Flying Rutabaga, at farmertofarmerpodcast.com or at purplepitchfork.com. And that makes 20 episodes of the Farmer to Farmer podcast. I think that's pretty cool. Thank you to everyone who has taken the time to share this podcast with your friends and community, to the great guests who have given so generously of their time and knowledge to the show, to everyone who has taken the time to provide feedback and suggestions, and to the sponsors who support the show. You're awesome. And I'm so proud to be a part of this community. Thank you so much. Keep weathering the weather and keep the tractor running.